You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper.
You're listening to a classic Cooper broadcast here on the Hour of the Time.
The Hour of the Time may be contacted at HOTT, that's H-O-T-T, P.O. Box 940, Eagar, spelled E-A-G-A-R, in the state of Arizona, 85925. Our phone number is 928-333-2942. And our website is www.houroftheTime.com.
Here is the theory. Quote, "It is thus necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation." A nation can be read people, race, church, folk. You can substitute any of those words for nation, as you will see. And because I interrupted, I will back up and start again and continue it all the way through the quote. Quote, "It is thus necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation, that the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interests of the nation as a whole, that above all, the unity of a nation's spirit and will are worth far more than the freedom of the spirit and will of an individual. The state of mind which subordinates the interest of the ego to the conservation of the community is really the first premise for every truly human culture. The basic attitude from which such activity arises we call, to distinguish it from egoism and selfishness, idealism. By this, we understand only the individual's capacity to make sacrifices for the community, for his fellow men. These statements were made in our century, ladies and gentlemen, by the leader of a major Western nation. His countrymen regarded his viewpoint as uncontroversial. His political program implemented it faithfully. The statements, dear listeners, were made by Adolf Hitler. He was explaining the moral philosophy of Nazism, which is, at its heart, nothing more or less than socialism. Just one step above communism. And, by all definitions, a couple of steps below a republic. That's measured on the scale of right to left, going from total control to total absence of control. The Nazis are on the left. You see, the Nazis were not a tribe of prehistoric savages. Their crimes, ladies and gentlemen, were the official legal acts and policies of modern Germany. An educated, industrialized, civilized Western European nation. A nation renowned throughout the world for the luster of its intellectual and cultural achievements. And by reason of its long line of famous artists and thinkers, Germany has been called, quote, the land of poets and philosophers, end quote. And make no mistake about it, their contribution to civilization has been great. But its education offered the country no protection against the sergeant mauls in its ranks. The German university students, you see, were among the earliest groups to back Hitler. The intellectuals, as they always are, were among his regime's most ardent supporters. And you find that today in the United States on every college campus across this country. Professors with distinguished academic credentials, eager to pronounce their benediction on the Führer's cause, put their scholarship to work full-time. They turned out a library of admiring volumes, adorned with obscure allusions to the learned references, veiled in mysticism and a perverted spirituality. The Nazis did not gain power, ladies and gentlemen, against the country's wishes. It didn't happen that way. In this respect, there was absolutely no gulf between the intellectuals and the people. The Nazi Party was elected to office by the freely cast ballots of millions of German voters, including men on every single social, economic, and educational level. In the national election of July 1932, the Nazis obtained 37% of the vote and a plurality of seats in the Reichstag. On January the 30th, 1933, in full accordance with the country's legal and constitutional principles, Hitler was appointed Chancellor. And only 5 weeks later, in the last and semi-free election of the pre-totalitarian period, the Nazis obtained 17 million votes, which was a full 44% of the total. The voters were aware of the Nazi ideology. Nazi literature, including statements of their plans for the future, papered the country. They could be found everywhere, blowing with the wind in the gutters, tacked upon fences, pasted upon walls, all during the last years of the Weimar Republic. Mein Kampf alone sold more than 200,000 copies between 1925 and 1932. The essence of the political system, ladies and gentlemen, which Hitler intended to establish in Germany was very clear. There was no mystery to anyone. In 1933, when Hitler did establish the system that he had promised, he did not find it necessary to forbid foreign travel until World War II. And those Germans who wished to flee the country could do so with little, if any, problem. The overwhelming majority did not flee. They were satisfied to remain. You see, the system which Hitler established, the social reality which so many Germans were so eager to embrace, or so willing to endure, for it must have been one or the other, the politics which began in a theory and ended in the concentration camps, was very simply the total state. The term from which the adjective totalitarian derives was in fact coined by Hitler's mentor, Mussolini. The state must have absolute power over every man and over every sphere of human activity, the Nazis declared. And I quote, The authority of the Führer is not limited by checks and controls, by special autonomous bodies or individual rights, but it is free and independent, all-inclusive and unlimited, end quote. That statement was made by Ernst Huber, an official party spokesman, in 1933. And he went on to say, the concept of personal liberties of the individual as opposed to the authority of the state had to disappear. It is not to be reconciled with the principle of the nationalistic Reich, said Huber to a country which listened and nodded. And he went on, quote, there are no personal liberties of the individual which fall outside of the realm of the state and which must be respected by the state. The constitution of the nationalistic Reich is therefore not based upon a system of inborn and inalienable rights of the individual, end quote. Now, folks, if the term statism designates a concentration of power in the state at the expense of individual liberty, then Nazism in politics was definitely a form of statism. In principle, it did not represent a new approach to government, for it was a continuation of the political absolutism, the absolute monarchies, the oligarchies, the theocracies, the random tyrannies, the racism which has characterized most of human history. Now, many writers, dear listeners, have noted many similarities between America today and Germany before Hitler. And I have brought this to your attention on many occasions during the hour of the time. These same writers have then shrugged off their own observations. They've succumbed to the notion, spread by today's intellectuals who have bought into socialism hook, line, and sinker, that it is bad history to compare two different countries. And this notion itself, a symptom of our current crisis, means that there are no principles governing human action, and that it is bad history to learn from history. And that, I can assure you, we have never learned to do. For history goes in cycles and repeats itself over and over and over again throughout the ages. The similarities, however, cannot be shrugged off. The crisis is real. You see, the crisis is the fact that our country, the United States of America, the freest, the most productive, and until recently the most moral country in the world, is now moving in Hitler's direction. America is moving, ladies and gentlemen, toward a Nazi form of totalitarianism. It has been doing this for decades. It has been doing so gradually, by default, and for the most part, unknowingly, but it is doing this systematically and without any significant opposition. In every cultural area, from science and education to art, religion, to politics and economics, the trend is now unmistakable. There are differences between America and the Weimar Republic. You see, our future, as far as one can judge, is still indeterminate. There is a chance. In fact, the great question mark of uncertainty hangs over the head of every citizen almost every day. But the current trend will not be checked unless we grasp in terms of essentials the ominous parallels between the two countries, and above all, the basic cause behind those parallels. You see, if we are to avoid a fate like that of Germany, we must find out what made such a fate possible. We must find out what, at the very root, is required to turn a country, Germany or any other, into a Nazi dictatorship, and then we must uproot that root, if it can be done. We have to look for something deeper than practical conditions, something that dictates man's view of what constitutes the practical. You see, in an advanced, civilized country, a handful of men were able to gain for their criminal schemes the enthusiastic backing of literally millions of decent, educated, law-abiding citizens. And just what is the factor that made this possible? You see, criminal groups and schemes have existed throughout history in every country. Someone is scheming in your town right this moment. They have been able to succeed only in certain periods. You see, the mere presence of these groups is not sufficient to account for their victory. Something made so many Germans so vulnerable to a takeover. Something armed the criminals and disarmed the country. Does that sound familiar? It should. It should ring bells all over your house, all over the room you're sitting in. Observe in this connection that the Nazis correctly regarded the power of propaganda as an indispensable tool. They could not have won the support of the German masses but for the systematic preaching of a complex array of theories, doctrines, opinions, notions, beliefs, mysticism. And not one of their central beliefs was ever original, as are none of those being bandied about today original. They found those beliefs widespread and waiting in the culture, and they seized upon them and broadcast them at top volume, thrusting them with an intensity back into the streets of Germany. And the men in the streets heard and recognized and sympathized with this propaganda, and they embraced those beliefs, and then they voted for their exponents. The Germans, ladies and gentlemen, would not have recognized or embraced those beliefs in the 19th century when the West was still being influenced by the remnants of the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, when the doctrines of the rights of man and the autonomy of the individual were paramount. But by the 20th century, such doctrines and the convictions on which they depended were no longer paramount. Germany was ideologically ripe for Hitler, just as the United States of America is ripe for whatever Messiah has the charisma and the political savvy to step up on the throne. The intellectual groundwork had been prepared. The country's ideas, a certain special category of ideas, were ready, born deep within the mysteries. There's a science whose subject matter is that category of ideas. And today in our colleges, this science has sunk to the lowest point in its history. Its teachers have declared that it has no questions to ask, no method to follow, and no answers to offer. And as a result, it is disappearing. It's losing its identity, its intelligibility, its students, and the last vestiges of its once noble reputation. It is the science of asking questions, something that I have tried to instill in each and every one of you every single night of this broadcast for the last 2 3/4 years. No one among the intellectuals of today or the general public would even suspect any longer that this science could be relevant to human life or action. Yet it is practiced amongst an elite group behind the closed doors of the lodges of the mysteries. And this science ladies and gentlemen, and make no mistake about it, this science determines the destiny of nations and the course of history. It is the source of a nation's frame of reference and code of values, the root of a people's character and culture, the fundamental cause shaping men's choices and decisions in every single crucial area of their lives. It is the science which directs men to embrace this world or to seek out some other that is said to transcend it, which directs them to reason or superstition, to the pursuit of happiness or of self-sacrifice, to production or starvation, to freedom or to slavery, to life or even to death. It is the science, ladies and gentlemen, which made the difference between the East and the West, between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, between the founding fathers of the new continent and the Adolf Hitlers of the old. It is the science which had to be destroyed if the catastrophes of our time were to become possible. And that science is philosophy. Philosophy is the study of the nature of existence, of knowledge, and of values. And values translates into ethics and morals. The branch of philosophy that studies existence is metaphysics, and you have been taught to laugh at it. Metaphysics identifies the nature of the universe as a whole. It tells men what kind of world they live in, and whether there is a supernatural dimension beyond it, or nothing at all. It tells men whether they live in a world of solid entities, natural laws, absolute facts, or in a world of illusory fragments, unpredictable miracles, and ceaseless flux. It tells men whether the things that they perceive by their senses and mind form a comprehensible reality with which they can deal, or some kind of unreal appearance which leaves them staring and helpless. The branch, ladies and gentlemen, of philosophy that studies knowledge is epistemology. And epistemology identifies the proper means of acquiring knowledge. You see, it tells men which mental processes to employ as methods of cognition and which to reject as invalid or deceptive. You see, above all, epistemology tells men whether reason is their faculty of gaining knowledge, and if so, how it works, or whether there is a means of knowledge other than reason, such as faith, or the instinct of society, or the feelings of the dictator. Or as Mr. Clerkin put it, listening to the blood. The branch of philosophy that studies values is ethics, or morality, which rests on both the above branches. On a view of the world in which man acts and of man's nature, including his means of knowledge. For ethics defines a code of values to guide human actions. It tells men the proper purpose of man's life and the means of achieving it. It provides the standard by which men are to judge good and evil, right and wrong, the desirable and the undesirable. Ethics tells a man, for instance, to pursue his own fulfillment or to sacrifice himself for the sake of something else, such as God, or his neighbor, or his nation, or his race. The branch of philosophy that applies ethics to social questions is politics, which studies the nature of social systems and the proper functions of government. And this is probably the first time that many of you have ever known that. Politics is not the start, but the product of a philosophic system. And if that system is absent, politics is chaotic. By their nature, political questions cannot be raised or judged except on the basis of some view of existence, of values, and of man's proper means of knowledge. Don't go away. I'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, the Hour of the Time is brought to you by Swiss, and ask them how you can help your family by putting some of your assets into real money, precious metals, in one or more of its various forms. Do that now. 1-800-289-2646. 1-800-289-2646. You'll be glad that you did. Since men cannot live or act without some kind of basic guidance, the issues of philosophy in some form necessarily affect every man and every social group and class. Most men, however, do not consider such issues in explicit terms. They absorb their ideas implicitly, eclectically, and with many contradictions from the cultural atmosphere around them, building into their souls without identifying it the various ideological vibrations emanating from school and church and arts and media and much more. A cultural atmosphere is not a primary. It is created ultimately by a handful of men, by those whose life work it is to deal with, originate, and propagate fundamental ideas. For the great majority of men, the influence of philosophy is indirect and unrecognized. But you must understand that it is real. The root causes of Nazism lies in a power that most people ignore, disparage, and underestimate. The cause is not the events hailed or cursed in headlines and street rallies, but the esoteric writings of the professors who decades or centuries earlier laid the foundation for those events. The symbol of the cause is not the munitions plants or the union halls or bank vaults of Germany or any other country, but its ivory towers, its universities, its lodge buildings. What came out of the towers in this regard is only coils of obscure, virtually indecipherable jargon, but that jargon is fatal. Make no mistake, it is fatal, and America is heading down that road now. The Nazi camps, notes a writer in the New York Times, were conceived, built, and often administered by PhDs, doctors of philosophy. Now, what had those PhDs been taught to think in their schools and universities, and where, dear listeners, did such ideas come from? It took centuries, literally centuries, and a brain-stopping chain of falsehoods to bring an entire people to the state of Hitler worship, for that's exactly what it was. Modern German culture, including its Nazi climax, is the result of a complex development in the history of philosophy involving dozens of figures stretching back to the beginnings of Western thought. The very same figures whom I have revealed to you on this broadcast helped to shape every Western nation, all of them. But in other countries, to varying extents, the results were mixed because there was also an opposite influence or an antidote at work. In Germany, by the turn of our century, the cultural atmosphere was unmixed. The traces of the antidote had long since disappeared, and the intellectual establishment was monolithic. Now, if we were to view the West's philosophic development in terms of essentials, there are three fateful turning points which stand out. Three major philosophers who, above all others, are responsible for generating the disease of collectivism and transmitting it to the dictators of our century. Whether it's collectivism within a nation, collectivism within a race, collectivism within the world. It is the same, and it emanates from the same source. Whether you call it socialism, communism, or hippieism, makes no difference. It is the same. Whether it is a Nazi, a fellow traveler, or a socialist, or just someone living down on the commune. It is all the same, and it comes from the same source. These three men, these three philosophers, for that is exactly what they were, are responsible, for the most part, for the situation wherein we find ourselves. The three are Plato, Kant, and Hegel. And the antidote to them is Aristotle. When's the last time you heard the name Aristotle? Plato, dear listener, is the father of collectivism in the West. He's the first thinker to formulate a systematic view of reality with a collectivist politics as its culmination. You see, in essence, Plato's metaphysics holds that the universe consists of two opposed dimensions, which are true reality, a perfect, immutable, supernatural realm, non-material, non-spatial, non-temporal, non-perceivable, and the material world in which we live. The material world, Plato holds, is only an imperfect appearance of true reality, a semi-real reflection or projection of it. Because Plato's metaphysics holds that reality is thus fundamentally spiritual or non-material in nature, he describes it technically in philosophy as idealism. So his reality is idealism, which most of us who strive for idealism found cannot be reached, and rejects the world around us, which we perceive as reality, as non-reality. The content of true reality, according to Plato, is a set of universals or forms, in effect, a set of disembodied abstractions representing that which is in common among various groups of particulars in this world. And because of this, for Plato, abstractions are supernatural existence. They are non-material entities in another dimension, independent of man's mind and of any of their material embodiments. The forms, Plato tells us repeatedly, are what is really real. The particulars they subsume, the concretes that make up this world, are not. They have only a shadowy, dreamlike half-reality. And I can see you shaking your head. This can't be true, you say. No one would pay any attention to this gobbledygook, but I can assure you, they do. It is the heart and soul of the religion taught in the Freemasonic lodges. And if you've listened to our series on the mysteries, you already know that. Momentous conclusions about man are implicit in this metaphysics, and were later made explicit by a long line of Platonists. Since individual men are merely particular instances of the universal man, they are not ultimately real. What is real about men is only the form which they share in common and reflect. To common sense, there appear to be many separate individual men, each independent of the others, each fully real in his own right. But to Platonism, this is a deception, you see. All the seemingly individual men are really the same one form in various reflections or manifestations of itself. Thus all men ultimately comprise one unity, and no earthly man is an autonomous entity, just as if a man were reflected in a multifaceted mirror, the many reflections would not be autonomous entities, and the whole is God. Thus the concept that man, if he perfects himself through the teachings of the mysteries behind the lodge doors, will himself become God. This is the promise of Lucifer, of Satan in the Garden of Eden. But remember, to these men, that is only a metaphor, a tale explaining the inexplainable. And what follows in regard to human action, according to Plato, is a life of self-sacrificial service. When men gather in society, says Plato, the unit of reality and the standard of value is the community as a whole. Whatever community you belong to, whether it is a racial community, a community within a nation, the world as community, as is being touted now in the universities, the environment as your community, a religious organization, makes no difference. This applies in any case where a community exists and where the life is considered to be a self-sacrificial service to that community. Each man, therefore, according to this philosophy, must strive as far as he can to wipe out his individuality, his personal desires, his ambitions, and everything else, and merge himself into the community, becoming one with it and living only to serve its welfare. On this view, the collective is not an aggregate, but an entity. You see, society, the state, is regarded as a living organism. This is the so-called organic theory of the state. And the individual becomes merely a cell of this organism's body with no more rights or privileges than belong to any other such cell. The first and highest form of the state and of the government and of the law, Plato writes, is a condition in which the private and individual is altogether banished from life, and things which are by nature private, such as eyes and ears and hands, have become common, and in some way see and hear and act in common, and all men express praise and blame and feel joy and sorrow on the same occasions, and whatever laws there are unite the city to the utmost. End quote. As for those individualistic terms, mine and not mine, another's and not another's, yours and mine and hers and his, the best ordered state will be the one in which the largest number of persons use these terms in the same sense, and which accordingly most nearly resembles a single person. Ladies and gentlemen, he is describing communism in its purest form. A dialectic which has never in history appeared in its purest form, even though some have tried to bring it into the world. For the old human failings always get in the way. The advocacy of the omnipotent state follows from the above as a matter of course. The function and authority of the state, according to Plato, should be unlimited. The state should indoctrinate the citizens with government-approved ideas in government-run schools, censor all art and literature and philosophy, assign men their vocations as they come of age, regulate their economic, and in certain cases even their sexual activities, as was done in Nazi Germany. The program of government domination of the individual is thoroughly worked out. In Plato's Republican Laws, one can read the details, which are the first blueprint of the totalitarian ideal. An ideal which has already taken firm root, and its branches are spreading throughout this country and indeed throughout the world. The blueprint includes the view that the state should be ruled by a special elite, the philosophers. Their title to absolute power, Plato explains, is their special wisdom, a council of wise men, a wisdom which derives from their insight into true reality, and especially into its supreme governing principle, the so-called form of the good. And without a grasp of this form, according to Plato, no man can understand the universe or even how to conduct his own life. But to grasp this crucial principle, Plato continues, and here you can just begin to see the relevance of epistemology to politics. The mind is inadequate. The form of the good, you see, cannot be known by the use of reason. It cannot be reached by a process of logic, according to Plato. It transcends human concepts and human language. It cannot be defined, described, or discussed. It can be grasped, but only after years of an ascetic preparation, only by an ineffable mystic experience, a kind of sudden, incommunicable revelation or intuition which is reserved to the philosophical elite. The mass of men, by contrast, are entangled in the personal concerns of this life. Sheeple, if you will. They're enslaved to the lower world revealed to them by their senses. They only work because they need money to buy some booze, to have a party, and get laid. They are incapable of achieving mystic contact with a supernatural principle. They are fit only to obey orders. This is the Platonic philosophy. Such, ladies and gentlemen, in its essentials is the view of reality, of man, and of the state, which one of the most influential philosophers of all time infused into the stream of Western culture. It has served ever since as the basic theoretical foundation by reference to which aspiring and actual dictators, both ancient and modern, have sought to justify their political systems. Some of those dictators never read or even heard of Plato, I can assure you, but absorbed his kind of ideas indirectly at home, in church, in the streets, in the prisons, or from the gutter. Some, however, did go back to the source. Plato, notes Walter Kaufmann, and I quote, was widely read in German schools under the Nazis, and special editions were prepared for Greek classes in the gymnasium, gathering together allegedly fascist passages instead of compiling a list of the many similar contributions to the Plato literature. It may suffice to mention that Dr. Hans F. K. Gunther, from whom the Nazis admittedly received their racial theories, also devoted an entire book to Plato, end quote. And as to Alfred Rosenberg, Hitler's official ideologist and a Jew, he celebrates Plato as one who wanted in the end to save his people on a racial basis through a forcible constitution, dictatorial in every detail. Now, if mankind has not perished from such constitutions, if it has not collapsed permanently into the swamp of statism, but has fought its way up through tortured centuries of brief rises and long, drawn-out falls, like a man fighting paralysis by the power of an inexhaustible vitality, it is only because that power has been provided by a giant whose philosophic system is on virtually every fundamental issue the opposite of Plato's. And that great spokesman for man and for this earth is and has always been Aristotle. You see, Aristotle is the champion of this world, the champion of nature as against the supernaturalism of Plato. Denying Plato's world of forms, Aristotle maintains that there is only one reality, the world of particulars in which we live, the world men perceive by means of their physical senses. Universals, he holds, are just aspects of existing entities isolated in thought by a process of selective attention. They have no existence apart from particulars. Reality is comprised not of Platonic abstractions, but of concrete individual entities, each with a definite nature, each obeying the laws inherent in its nature. Aristotle's universe is the universe of science, the physical world. And his view is not a shadowy projection controlled by some divine dimension, but an autonomous, self-sufficient realm. It's an orderly, intelligible, natural realm open to the mind of man. And in such a universe, ladies and gentlemen, knowledge cannot be acquired by special revelations from another dimension. There's no place for ineffable institutions of the beyond. He repudiates the mystical elements in Plato's epistemology. Aristotle is the father of logic and the champion of reason as man's only means of knowledge. Knowledge, he holds, must be based on and derived from the data of sense experience. It must be formulated in terms of objectivity, defined concepts. It must be validated by a process of logic. You see, for Plato, the good life is essentially one of renunciation and selflessness. A life that is not a life. Man should flee from the pleasures of this world in the name of fidelity to a higher dimension, just as he should negate his own individuality in the name of union with the collective. And in that kind of a world, liberty does not exist. There are no creator-endowed rights for man, nor protection of those rights. But for Aristotle, the good life is one of personal self-fulfillment. Man should enjoy the values of this world. He should use his mind to the fullest. Each man should work to achieve his own happiness here on earth. And in the process, he should be conscious of his own value. Pride, writes Aristotle, a national pride, I should say a rational pride, in oneself and in one's moral character, is, when it is earned, the crown of the virtues. And we will continue tomorrow night, ladies and gentlemen, for this is important that you understand what is happening and where it is coming from. And if you haven't been to a university in a long time, I suggest you go and sit in on some of these classes. You will hear what I have relayed to you tonight being taught to your children over and over and over again in almost every classroom that they inhabit. This broadcast tonight was brought to you from a book entitled The Ominous Parrallels by Leonard Peikoff. It's a brilliant study, ladies and gentlemen, of America today and the ominous parallels with the utter chaos of pre-Hitler Germany. Good night, and God bless you all, and God save this republic.
You're listening to a classic Cooper broadcast here on the Hour of the Time.
The Hour of the Time may be contacted at HOTT, that's H-O-T-T, P.O. Box 940, Eager, spelled E-A-G-A-R, in the state of Arizona, 85925. Our phone number is 928-333-2942, and our website is www.hourofthetime.com.
You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Ladies and gentlemen, come alive in '95, the year of empowerment, Forever Free America Rally, March 11th, 1995. I will be there. Hope to see you all. It's at 689 South E Street, San Bernardino, California. And you can call this number for information. It's 602-204-2386. That's area code 602-204-2386. It's, let me see, it's $10 in advance and $15 at the door. So call that number and find out how you can get your tickets in advance so you don't have to pay that extra $5. I'll be there all day. And come by, say hello, talk a while. I'm only going to speak for 45 minutes. I'm going to have plenty of time. And we'll have a table. My book will be there and a whole bunch of other stuff. That is, if Annie gets it all ready. She's in charge of those things. You know, I hate to even touch it. I don't even like to get involved in that stuff, really. But I do like to meet people and shake their hand and talk and do those kinds of things. Also, on February the 18th, in the old white church at 549 East Marshall, that's at the northwest corner of Hilton and Marshall in Ferndale, Michigan, there will be a Constitution Party meeting at 2 p.m. That's on February the 18th at 2 p.m. at the old white church at 549 East Marshall. That's the northwest corner of Hilton and Marshall in Ferndale, Michigan. I will be there. And I've got some important things to say, so I hope all of you are there also. If you'd like information, phone 810-674-8094. That's 810-674-8094. Also, we've done a little shuffling, ladies and gentlemen. And here's what we've done. Aaron Russo will remain the chairman of the Constitution Party. I will remain the president of the Constitution Party. And Aaron and I exchange hats and functions all the time. And we have appointed Karen Scarborough, the national director of the Constitution Party. And she will be taking care of the day-to-day business. And so once again, we're going to change the address for you to write to. This time, it's going to be permanent for a while. So you can write to the Constitution Party at 2357 Pine Orchard Drive. That's 2357 Pine Orchard Drive, Waterford, Michigan, 48329. That's 2357 Pine Orchard Drive, Waterford, Michigan, 48329. And I'll repeat this from time to time so that you'll know. We hate to do this to you folks, but Aaron and I are so involved in so many things, and we're traveling all the time, it's just impossible for either one of us to take care of the day-to-day business of the party. We're free now to make decisions. We're free to travel and speak. We're free to do all the radio guest spots representing the Constitution Party. I'm free to travel and work with the coalition of CURE. And this, believe me, this is going to work much better. You're going to get personal answers to all your letters. Everything's going to go faster and much, much smoother. Also, the new phone number for the Constitution Party is 810-674-8094. That's 810-674-8094. And once again, the new address is the Constitution Party, 2357 Pine Orchard Drive, Waterford, Michigan, 48329. Everything has been sent there, and so we're going to be able to function much better and much quicker. And of course, if you need to talk to Aaron or I, you can reach us through this number here at the Research Center, or Aaron's number that you first got when we first announced the formation of the Constitution Party. So, also in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts branch of the Constitution Party is having a kickoff meeting for party leaders only. That's party leaders only. The public is not invited, but that's on Thursday, February the 16th. So if there's anybody out there who is a leader of a group, for instance, if you're a leader of some organization in the Constitution Party, Constitution Coalition, the Libertarian Party, the Patriot Party, the American Party, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, anybody involved with any large group of people as a leader, or a political party as a leader, meet with the Massachusetts Constitutional Party on Thursday, February the 16th. That's Thursday, February the 16th. That's at the Villanova Family Diner. That's the Villanova Family Diner at Lancaster Avenue and Route 320. Lancaster Avenue and Route 320. That's real nice. They didn't tell me what town it is. Folks, you got to tell me what town it's in. You know where that's at, but I haven't got the faintest idea, neither does anybody else out there listening. Luckily, they gave you a number to call. Call this number and they'll tell you what town that's in, okay? Thursday, February the 16th at 610. Call Mike at 610-494-2113. Call Mike at 610-494-2113. If you're a leader of any group or any party, they want you to attend that meeting to try to organize behind one candidate. You see, if we all feel different candidates, I don't care what you believe in or what party you belong to. If you're a third party, it's a sure lose. I hope you understand that. Our hope is in a coalition. That's where we can win, and we can win. So get behind it. Let's make it work. Also, folks, the crap is flying out there. Oh, here, it's from the American Patriot Fax Network. Yes, sir. From old Ken Varden himself. And from Rick Butkowski to Ken Varden, militia, red alert. Don't believe it. These guys haven't got the authority to call a red alert for the militia. They claim their source is a 4-star general, and I guarantee you, if either one of these people ever met a real 4-star general, they'd have to change their pants and take a bath. There are no leaks, ladies and gentlemen, and 4-star generals don't get 4 stars by running around talking about what they're going to do. This is a bunch of crap, just like the crap you get from the militia of Montana and a bunch of other of these people out there, and specifically the American Patriot Fax Network. There's more disinformation, outright bullshit and lies flying around on these things than I've ever seen in my life. And it claims here, we have received a condition red alert nationwide on March 25th, 1995 at 4 a.m. A definite hit will be made on all militia units and other patriotic organizations. Source of this info is a 4-star general. And if you want to swallow that, folks, I got all kinds of things that I can charge you to shove down your throat. Oh, boy, where do these people come from? I don't know. But stand by, because got some good stuff for you tonight. Don't go away. Aristotle is the champion of this world. This is a continuation in our discussion of the philosophy that's bringing about this collectivism, socialism, communism, one world, socialistic government, all the lies that are flying across the country. They fly in the face of reason. Aristotle, the champion of this world, the champion of nature, as against the supernaturalism of Plato. Remember him? Denying Plato's world of forms, Aristotle, dear listeners, maintains that there is only one reality. We're talking philosophy here, not religion. Doesn't matter what you believe, just listen. The world of particulars in which we live is this reality, this one reality. The world men perceive by means of their physical senses, the only one you're capable of dealing with. The one in which you are surrounded with sensory perceptions. Universals, Aristotle holds, are merely aspects of existing entities, isolated in thought by a process of selective attention. They have no existence apart from particulars. Reality, he says, is comprised not of Platonic abstractions, but of concrete individual entities, each with a definite nature, each obeying the laws inherent in its nature. It is the outward manifestation of God, if you will, these laws. Aristotle's universe, you see, is the universe of science. Science, men claim, takes us away from God, but in the proving of a natural order, laws that are never broken in nature, the existence of God is confirmed. The physical world, in Aristotle's view, is not a shadowy projection controlled by divine dimension, but an autonomous, self-sufficient realm. It is an orderly, intelligible, natural realm which is open to the mind of man. In such a universe, knowledge cannot be acquired by special revelations from another dimension. There's no place for ineffable intuitions of the beyond, such as those found in the Lodge. Repudiating the mystical elements in Plato's epistemology, Aristotle, you see, is the father of logic and the champion of reason as man's only means of knowledge. When you leave the realm of reason, you have entered the world of religion and belief, based upon faith, those things which can never be proven. And there lies the contention developed amongst men between these conflicting belief structures of a world which man cannot see, nor touch, nor smell, nor hear, nor communicate with, and until man dies, never knows the reality of such a place. Aristotle holds that knowledge must be based on and derived from the data of sense experience. It must be formulated in terms of objectively defined concepts. It must be validated by a process of logic. For Plato, the good life is essentially one of renunciation and selflessness. Man should flee from the pleasures of this world in the name of fidelity to a higher dimension, just as he should negate his own individuality in the name of union with the collective. But for Aristotle, the good life is one of personal self-fulfillment. Man should enjoy the values of this world, using his mind to the fullest. Each man should work to achieve his own happiness here on earth, and in the process, he should be conscious of his own value. Pride, writes Aristotle, a rational pride in oneself and in one's moral character is, when it is earned, and understand that, when it is earned, the crown of the virtues. A proud man does not negate his own identity. He doesn't sink selflessly into the community. He is not a promising subject for the Platonic state, and that's why Americans will never make good communists. They will never make good little slaves in a socialist world. Although Aristotle's writings include a polemic against the more extreme features of Plato's collectivism, Aristotle himself is not a consistent advocate of political individualism. You see, his own politics is a mixture of statist and anti-statist elements. But the primary significance of Aristotle, or of any philosopher, ladies and gentlemen, does not lie in his politics. It lies in the fundamentals of his system, his metaphysics, and epistemology. It has been said that in his basic attitude toward life, every man is either Platonic or Aristotelian. The same may be said of periods of Western history. The medieval period, under the sway of such philosophers as Plotinus and Augustine, was an era dominated by Platonism. And during much of this period, Aristotle's philosophy was almost unknown in the West. But owing largely to the influence of Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle was rediscovered in the 13th century. The Renaissance, ladies and gentlemen, represented a rebirth of the Aristotelian spirit. The results of that spirit are written across the next 2 centuries, which men describe properly as the age of reason and the age of enlightenment. It's what brought us out of the inconsistencies and the terrible oppression and the superstitions of the Dark Ages. The results include the rise of modern science, the rise of an individualist political philosophy, the work of John Locke and others, which, quite frankly, are responsible, directly responsible for the ideals and principles upon which America was based. The consequent spread of freedom across the civilized world is one of the outcomes of the Aristotelian philosophy. And the birth of the freest country in the history of the world, in fact, the only country which ever truly set men free, the United States of America. The great corollary of these results, the product of men who were armed with the knowledge of the scientists and who were free at last to act, was the Industrial Revolution, which turned poverty into abundance and transformed the face of the West. The Aristotelianism released by Aquinas and the Renaissance was sweeping away the dogmas and the shackles of the old world, the past. Reason, reason. Freedom, freedom. How many of you have ever said that word and felt it flow across your lips? Freedom. That's right. Try it, everyone. Reason, freedom, and production were replacing faith, force, and poverty. The age-old foundations of statism were being challenged and undercut. The tragedy of the West, however, lies in the fact that the seeds of Platonism had been firmly embedded in philosophy almost from its beginning, and had been growing steadily through the post-Renaissance period. Thus, while the revolutionary achievements inspired by Aristotelianism were reshaping the life of the West, an intellectual counter-revolution was at work, gradually gathering momentum. A succession of thinkers was striving to reverse the Aristotelian trend and to resurrect the basic principles of Platonism. It was the Aristotelian philosophy, ladies and gentlemen, that allowed freedom to work. For in order to have reason, ideas must be expressed. Nothing could be censored. Men were free for the first time in the history of the world to say what was on their mind, to exchange ideas, to freely converse in the marketplace and in the meetings where scientists and learned men came together, and in the halls of churches and great religious organizations. For the first time, old dogmas began to be challenged, and some of them rightly so. For the universe, as we know now, never did, as the Pope declared, spin around the earth. And the earth has never been at the center of the universe, nor never will it be. These are the things that our forefathers knew, and that is why they established the protections in the Constitution for each individual citizen, so that reason would prevail. You don't see that anymore, and we're going to talk extensively about it before we're done with our talks on philosophy. The climax, ladies and gentlemen, of this development, the resurrection of the basic principles of Platonism, actually came in the late 18th century. The man who consummated the successful anti-Aristotelian revolution, the man who more than any other put an end to the Enlightenment and opened the door to its opposite, was a German philosopher, the most influential German philosopher in history, and his name was Immanuel Kant, spelled K-A-N-T. The very famous Masonic writer, who in one of his editions of the Masonic Encyclopedia, his name is Mackey, by the way, he said, to understand Freemasonry, one must understand Kant. And if one does not understand Kant, one cannot understand Freemasonry. A great revelation there. Most of you, no doubt, have never heard of this man. One of Kant's major goals was to save religion, including the essence of religious morality, from the onslaughts of science. His system represents a massive effort to raise the principle of Platonism in a somewhat altered form, once again to a position of commanding authority over Western culture. Kant, you see, places his primary emphasis on epistemological issues. His method of attack is to wage a campaign against the human mind. Man's mind, he holds, is unable to acquire any knowledge of reality. Well, it's clear that Immanuel Kant never in his life listened to the hour of the time. And it's true, because he died a long, long time ago. Just think how it would have changed the world if he could have listened to the hour of the time and gained a real taste of reality. For it was no different in his time than it is today. The common man was fed lie after lie after lie and was manipulated as a herd of sheep is manipulated by the dogs and the shepherd into the pens to be sheared and then up the hill to the slaughterhouse. In any process of cognition, according to Kant, whether it be sense experience or abstract thought, the mind automatically alters and distorts the evidence confronting it. It filters or structures the material it receives from reality in accordance with a set of innate and subjective processing devices whose operation it cannot escape. Now remember, this is according to Kant. He says the world that men perceive, therefore, the world of orderly spatio-temporal material entities, is essentially a creation of man's consciousness. What men perceive is not reality as it is, but merely reality as it appears to man, given the special structure of the human mind. Thus, for Kant, as for Plato, the universe consists of two opposed dimensions: true reality, a super-sensible realm of things in themselves, in Kant's terminology, and a world of appearances which is not ultimately real. the material world men perceive by means of their physical senses. And this is where things begin to be twisted around. This is where wrong began to become right, and right began to become wrong. Where morals began to disappear. Plato was more than a Platonist despite his mysticism, for he was a member of the mysteries. In fact, he describes his initiation in his writings. He was also a pagan Greek, and as such he exhibited a certain authentic respect for reason, a respect which was implicit in Greek philosophy, no matter how explicitly irrational it became. But the Kantian mysticism, however, suffers from no such pagan restraints. Kant threw reason out the window. His mysticism flows forth triumphantly, sweeping the prostrate human mind before it. Since man can never escape the distorting agents inherent in the structure of his consciousness, says Kant, quote, things in themselves, end quote, are in principle unknowable. Reason is impotent to discover anything about reality. If it tries, it can only bog down in impenetrable contradictions. Logic is merely a subjective human device, devoid of reference to or basis in reality. For according to Kant, the world around us is not real. Science, while useful as a means of ordering the data of the world of appearances, is limited to describing a surface world of man's own creation and says nothing about things as they really are. Man's own creation? Must men then resign themselves to a total skepticism? No, says Kant. There's one means of perceiving the barrier between man and existence. Since reason, logic, and science are denied access to reality, the door is now open for men to approach reality by a different, non-rational method. Non-rational. The door is now open to faith. Faith. Taking their cue from their needs, men can properly believe, for instance, in God, and in an afterlife, even though they cannot prove the truth of their beliefs, and even though two different men, no matter that they believe the same thing, will argue amongst their own belief what is real and what is not real. And neither can prove to the other, except by force of personality or argument. And no matter how powerful the rational argument against their faith, that argument can always be dismissed out of hand. For one need merely remind its advocate that rational knowledge and rational concepts are applicable only to the world of appearances, not to reality. Upside down, backwards. Kant was looking in a mirror. In a word, reason having been silenced, the way is cleared once more for an orgy of mystic fantasy. And that is what you see around you in the world today. For Kant swayed the minds of many. The name of this orgy, the philosophic term for the 19th century intellectuals' revolt against reason and the Enlightenment, is, ladies and gentlemen, Romanticism. See, many of you have been wondering for a long time what that meant, or you thought you knew what.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you understand the real world, the world that we perceive around us versus the fantasy world, the creation of many different minds, and depending upon who you talk to, the real world of Kant varies according to who's talking about it, or what religion they belong to, or how they perceive the other dimensionalities of the worlds of the extraterrestrials, the world of the ascended masters and the channelers and the New Age movement and all these things. And there's nothing wrong with people believing this if they want to, as long as they don't infringe upon the right of others to believe what they want to. But if you perceive the world around you as real, and you understand what the real world can bring about, you need to call. Just talk to them. You're not obligated to do or buy or purchase or say or listen to anything. But folks, I can assure you that Immanuel Kant was wrong. And you are living in the real world. And around you, what you perceive can hurt you. And the machinations and the manipulations of the people who believe in the philosophy of Plato and Kant and the third philosopher, which we will be discussing shortly, can hurt you, can destroy you. For they live in a world of lies and deception and political correctness, invention, if you will. Whatever their imagination can perceive as their real world, if they have the power, they can subject you to it. And that's why we're all so screwed up today, because that's exactly what's happening. You need some real money. Not the wispy kind that Tinkerbell sprinkles, but the real kind, made up of precious metals in the various forms. Talk to them about it, and do it now, folks. 1-800-4646. Do it now. You'll feel much better. You'll take a great weight off your shoulders. And that's the real world you're feeling when you feel that weight, that uncertainty, that feeling in your gut that something is terribly wrong is telling you the truth from your perceptions of what's happening around you. Not some mystical world that you can't see, that Kant perceives as reality. They talk about in the lodge. Lodges, I should say. So call 1-800-289-2646 and do it now. Tell them William Cooper sent you. Tell them that you're a steady listener to the hour of the time, and you'll be given red carpet treatment. I guarantee it. The name of the orgy, the philosophic term for the 19th century intellectuals' revolt against reason and the Enlightenment, is Romanticism. I have, writes Kant, therefore found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. When I was a child, I had faith that Santa Claus was real. I had faith that the Tooth Fairy was real. I had faith that the Easter Bunny laid eggs. Kant also found it necessary to deny happiness. To deny happiness. Socialism denies happiness. If you don't believe that, take a trip to Eastern Europe, or to what used to be the old Soviet Union, or to Russia, and talk to those people about what it was like to live under total socialism in the form of communism. And don't let anybody fool you. There is not much difference between the two, if any. Deny happiness. Kant found it necessary to deny happiness in order to make room for duty. Duty. And if you know anything about Hitler's Germany, you can already see where he got at least a part of his philosophy. The trains must run on time, even if we have to kill everybody who runs the trains to make them run on time. The essence of moral virtue, he says, is selflessness. Selfless, lifelong obedience to duty without any expectation of reward and regardless of how much it might make one suffer. And if that's true, what is the purpose? Kant's attack on reason, this world and man's happiness, was the decisive turning point. As the main line of modern philosophy rapidly absorbed his basic tenets, the last elements of the Aristotelian approach were abandoned, particularly in Germany. Philosophers turned as a group to variants of Platonism. This time an extreme, militant Platonism, a Platonism shorn of its last vestiges of respect for reason. You see, it is Kant who made possible the sudden mushrooming of the Platonic collectivism in the modern world, and especially in Germany. Kant is not a full-fledged statist, but a philosopher's political views, to the extent that they contradict the essentials of his system, have little historical significance. Kant accepts certain elements of individualism, not because of his basic approach, but in spite of it, as a legacy of the Enlightenment period in which he lived. This merely suggests, ladies and gentlemen, that Kant did not ever grasp the political implications of his own metaphysics and epistemology. He didn't understand the effects of his own thinking. His heirs, however, did. A line of German Romanticist philosophers followed Kant in the 19th century, each claiming to be his true follower, each avid for a reality beyond this world and a means of knowledge beyond reason, each contributing his share to the growth of an impassioned collectivism that poisoned the intellectual atmosphere of Germany. The most famous of these men, the most influential, the ruling figure of 19th century philosophy, whose name you have heard me mention over and over and over again on this broadcast, was Hegel. Hegel, you see, is a post-Kantian Platonist. Taking full advantage of the anti-Aristotelianism sanctioned by Kant, Hegel launches an attack on the root principles of Aristotle's philosophy, on the principles of Aristotelian logic, which even Kant had not dared to challenge directly. He didn't dare. Reality, declares Hegel, is inherently contradictory. It is a systematic progression of colliding contradictions organized in triads, trilateral, of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and men must think accordingly. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They should not strive for old-fashioned static consistency. They should not be limited by the one-sided Aristotelian view that every existence has a specific identity, that things are what they are, that A is A. On the contrary, he says, they owe their ultimate allegiance to a higher principle, the principle of the identity of opposites, as above, so below. The principle that things are not what they are, that A is non-A. It was the mysticism that brought about the German SS, the new religion of Germany, dedication to duty and the Volk. All a deception to bring the mass under control and to make the trains run on time. Hegel describes the above as a new conception of reason and as a new dialectic logic. On its basis, he proceeds to erect his own version of Platonism. Like Plato and Kant, he is an idealist in metaphysics. True reality, he holds, is a non-material dimension, beyond time and space and human sense perception. And if that is true, how in the hell did he find it? He didn't. He invented it. In Hegel's version, reality is a dynamic, cosmic mind or thought process which in various contexts is referred to as the absolute, the spirit, the world, reason, God, etc. According to Hegel, it is in the essential nature of this entity to undergo a constant process of evolution or development, unfolding itself in various stages. Pantheism. Pantheism. In one of these stages, the absolute externalizes itself, assuming the form of a material world. And if you read Blavatsky, she writes and talks about the externalization of the hierarchy. Continuing its career, it takes on the appearance of a multiplicity of human beings, each seemingly distinct from the others, each seemingly an autonomous individual with his own personal thoughts and desires. But according to Hegel, the appearance of such separate individuals represents, however, to Hegel, merely a comparatively low stage in the Absolute's career. It is not the final truth about reality. It does not represent the culmination of the Absolute's development. At that stage, in effect, at the apex or climax of reality, it turns out, in Hegel's view, that distinctions of any kind, including the distinctions between mind and matter and between one man and another, are unreal. Opposites are identical. A is non-A. It turns out that everything is one, and that the things of this world, which appear to us to be individual, self-contained entities, each real in its own right, you sitting there on that couch or in that chair or on that floor, are merely so many partial aspects of one all-inclusive, all-consuming whole, the Absolute, which alone has full reality. And in Hegel's projection of this, it becomes der Führer, der State, der Volk, ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. Do you understand where we're headed now? Do you understand what this philosophy brings into being? It is the base upon which is built communism, socialism, collectivism. Why am I one of the few who really understands this? For what I just said isn't written anywhere. The ethics and politics which Hegel derives from his fundamental philosophy can be indicated by two sentences from his Philosophy of Right. Quote, "A single person, I need hardly say, is something subordinate, and as such he must dedicate himself to the ethical whole. Hence, if the state claims life, the individual must surrender it," end quote. Hegel's collectivism and state worship are more explicit than anything to be found in Plato's writings. Since everything is ultimately one, the group, he holds, has primacy over the individual. If each man learns to suppress his identity and coalesce with his fellows, the resulting collective entity, the state, will be a truer reflection of reality, a higher manifestation of the Absolute. The state, in Hegel's view, is not an association of autonomous individuals. It is itself an individual, a mystic person, that swallows up the citizen and transcends them, an independent, self-sustaining organism made of human beings with a will and purpose of its own. All the worth which the human being possesses, writes Hegel, all spiritual reality he possesses only through the state. So what is, and what lives, and what breathes on an individual reality, what thinks, what has, what is, becomes non-existent in the light of the formation of these individuals into what is collectively called the state, a non-entity brought about by these individuals, which by its very formation makes them non-existent. For the promotion and the furtherance of this non-existent entity which they brought about for their own mutual benefit and protection now supersedes their reality, and they are subject to its every whim. Their task, duty to the state. Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. The state organism is no more secular entity as a manifestation of the absolute. It is a creature of God, Hegel says, and thus demands not merely obedience from its citizens, but reverential worship. And remember, this is not just Hegel. It began with Plato. It was expounded upon by Kant, and it was brought to its present form by Hegel. Reverential worship. The state is the divine idea as it exists on earth. The march of God in the world, that is what the state is. The purpose of the state, therefore, is not the protection of its citizens. The state is not a means to any human end. As an entity with supernatural credentials, it is an absolute, unmoved end in itself. And it has supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty it is to be a member of the state. And those who adhere to these ideas and ideals don't even understand what it is that they are doing or bringing about or even are a part of. These are the kinds of political ideas which Hegel, more than any other man, injected into the mind of early 19th century Germany, perpetuated in a variety of forms. Perpetuated in a variety of forms by a long chain of secondary figures and a derivative influences. These ideas gradually became commonplace in Germany and in other countries, including Italy, and are at the present time in full bloom behind the symbol of the rose in the United States of America. The aspiring dictators of the 20th century and their intellectual defenders moved with alacrity to embrace such commonplaces and to cash in on them. Both the fascists and the Nazis were in the forefront of this trend. In the fascist literature, the influence of Hegel is generally acknowledged. Prominent neo-Hegelian philosophers such as Mario Palmieri and Giovanni Gentile upheld fascism on a Hegelian foundation and earned a formal endorsement from Mussolini. The world seen through fascism, writes Mussolini, is not this material world which appears on the surface, in which man is an individual separated from all others and standing by himself. The man of fascism is an individual who is nation and fatherland, which is a moral law binding together individuals and the generations into a tradition and a mission, suppressing the instinct for a life enclosed within the brief round of pleasure in order to restore within duty a higher life, free from the limits of time and space, end quote. Total bullshit. Nazi literature is not so overtly Hegelian in its formulations. Posing as the spokesman for a higher biological truth, the Nazis generally dropped the idealistic metaphysics of Hegel and even attacked him. Admittedly or not, however, the Nazis, like the fascists, rely completely on the ideas of Hegel, not only for their basic collectivist approach, but for many of the more specific political theories necessary to implement it in practice. Hegel, for instance, seeks to undercut any individualist opponents by proclaiming that statism represents a passion for human liberty, when in practice, human liberty is not allowed. A man is free, Hegel explains, when he acts as he himself wills to act, but since the state is the true self of the individual, what a man really wills, even though he may not know it, is what the state wills. Liberty, therefore, is obedience to the orders of the government. Such obedience guarantees true freedom for the real self, even if the illusory self is being sent to Auschwitz. The masses of men, notes Hegel, do not understand this viewpoint. The people, therefore, do not know what it wills. To know what one wills, and still more to know what the absolute will, reason wills, is the fruit of profound apprehension and insight, precisely the things which are not popular. Hence, Hegel, like Plato, is opposed to the theory of popularly elected representative government. Instead, he calls for an authoritarian state resembling a Prussian monarchy, and the monarch's decrees, we are told, embody the true will of the people. And if liberty is to be the attribute of the real man, says Mussolini, and not of the scarecrow invented by the individualistic liberalism, then fascism is for liberty. It is for the only kind of liberty that is serious, the liberty of the state. There is no freedom of the individual, says the Nazi Otto Dietrich. There is only freedom of peoples, nations, or races, for these are the only material and historical realities through which the life of the individual exists. The Führerreich of the people, says Huber, is founded on the recognition that the true will of the people cannot be disclosed through parliamentary votes and plebiscites, but that the will of the people in its pure and uncorrupted form can only be expressed through der Führer. Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. And that is really what racism is all about. It is totally opposed to the American ideal of the rights of the individual and the protection of those rights through a written constitutional contract between the government and the states, and another written contract between the states and the people to protect the individuality and the right of every single citizen to be an individual and worship at the altar of his or her choice, and to do or say or speak or feel anything that he or she wishes, as long as they do not infringe upon the rights of others or hurt the person or property of any other citizen. Good night. God bless you all. And God save this republic.
Walk over the